going to get worse. I was criticised by certain sections of the media for calling radical Islam a cancer in our society following the Westminster attack. I make no apologies for saying this, and I will repeat it today. It is a cancer that needs to be cut out. It is the role of UKIP in our national political life to challenge the cosy establishment consensus whenever it is failing the British public. We did that on immigration control. We did that on Brexit. And now we will do it by tackling issues surrounding integration. These are issues that the other political parties would rather brush under the carpet and the Westminster Chatterati would rather ignore, simply because it makes them feel uncomfortable. The Prime Minister has, during her time in high office, presided over cuts to our police service and reductions in our armed forces too. She has put pressure on the police to lower the numbers of stops and searches they carry out. And no progress whatever was made reducing the level of immigration in order to give social cohesion a chance to advance. This, despite Mrs May's pledge to bring net migration down to the tens of thousands. And indeed, this morning it was announced that we have added a city the size of Hull to our population in the last year. It is also a dereliction of duty to allow jihadis to return to this country, including, it seems, Monday night terrorists. I want to make it clear that I believe that anyone who leaves this country to fight for Islamic State should forfeit their passport, their citizenship, and never be allowed to return. More police, more soldiers, more prison officers, and more border guards are essential. There are many other things in our manifesto today, including something that all of the other political parties would love to be able to offer but cannot, and that is 11 billion a year spending increase for the NHS and adult social care by the end of the next Parliament. That increase matches the reduction we are pledged to make in foreign aid spending. All of our key public services came together to help the victims of the terror atrocity in Manchester. The police, the ambulance service, fire and rescue, and all of the hospitals which are treating the injured. The response just serves to emphasise how people who work in our public services are so vital to our society and its civilised values. It is time to start investing in them again. There is, of course, also a major section in the manifesto about Brexit. And we set out how we will keep the government honest to its stated claim of taking Britain out of the European Union. We have laid out 6 key Brexit tests that we feel need to be met to ensure that we get the kind of Brexit that people voted for last year. UKIP is the country's insurance policy, and if the government begin to backslide during these negotiations, then it must know that UKIP will be there. We will also be the party that stands up for gender equality, freedom of expression, and equality before the law, and make sure that these values are applied in every community within our country. No doubt we will suffer insults from the politically correct brigade for doing so, but that will not deter us. They will be the same people who called us racist for simply arguing for lower immigration. And just as we were proved right about the strains of excessive immigration and the strains it was placing on British communities, and we were right about the way Brussels had hollowed out our democracy, so we will be proven right again about Britain's integration emergency. It's seldom easy being a UKIPper. Joining an establishment party would offer a far easier route to preferment. But this party is all about believing in our country and putting it first. It is not the British way to turn a blind eye to evil in our midst. It is not good enough to light candles and proclaim that extremists will not beat us. Action is required on multiple fronts, and I am proud UKIP is setting out its patriotic agenda for defending our country and our way of life. And now, I am equally proud to hand over to my Deputy Chairman, Suzanne Evans, who will take you through some of the specific proposals within our 2017 Manifesto. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Paul. And I too would like to extend my deepest sympathies to the families and friends of all those killed and injured on Monday evening. The worst of it is that as families mourn and we unite in our grief and solidarity with Manchester, we know there are others planning the next deadly atrocity. This terrorist must be stopped. This terror must stop. Carrying on as normal is not an option. Our first step must be to make our country safer, and that means reversing cuts to our policing, security and defence budgets. Theresa May might like to portray herself as a strong and stable leader who can tackle extremism, but her record suggests otherwise. As Home Secretary, she made deep cuts to our border force and oversaw record levels of uncontrolled immigration. Even as Islamic State fighters threatened to infiltrate Britain by taking advantage of the refugee crisis. As terror stalked our streets, the Tories made 17,000 police officers redundant. As the murderous ideology of the Islamists took hold in our prisons, 7,000 prison officers were taken out of service. As Islamism advanced across the globe, the Tories cut 20,000 personnel from our armed forces. Theresa May has allowed jihadists who fought alongside Islamic State back into our country. She's failed to prevent extremists spreading hatred in our universities and our mosques. On her watch, even non-EU migration spiralled out of control and net migration reached record highs. A growing backlog of failed asylum seekers and a failure to deport illegal immigrants or foreign criminals were further hallmarks of her time as Home Secretary. Nothing will change if Theresa May wins a huge majority. Reportedly, not a single member of her cabinet really wants to see immigration reduced. As for Jeremy Corbyn, a man who's lauded murderous dictators, who shows a marked reluctance to fully condemn terrorism and still backs uncontrolled immigration, he is not the answer either. UKIP is the only party you can trust on immigration. We know that a country without borders ceases to be a country at all, and that strong border control is the first defence against any terror threat. We're the only party committed to a balanced migration policy, setting net migration at zero for at least 5 years. This still means around 300,000 migrants can settle here every year, but we will make sure these are migrants who respect the British way of life, who embrace our heritage, our culture and our values. We will test their social attitudes, and if they do not agree, for example, that women or gay people are equal and not second-class citizens, then quite simply, they will not get in. Under UKIP's plans, 4,000 more border guards will be recruited, reversing Tory budget and manpower cuts that have made it easier for illegal immigrants to escape detection and deportation. We will prevent those with ideologies incompatible with British values from coming to our country to spread their hatred and embed themselves in our communities. As for those extremists already here, if we can deport them, we will deport them. No excuses. Of course, controlling our borders and immigration alone will not solve this problem. It's too late for that. These measures should have been put in place years ago, and at the very least after 9/11, but the EU and our government failed to act. Combating Islamist terror here requires a dramatic shift in our attitudes, but yet again, only UKIP seems to have the stomach for this. We've already spoken during this election campaign about the failures of multiculturalism, the divisive philosophy that anyone from whatever country, holding whatever beliefs, may come and live freely in Britain and continue to behave as if they were still in their country of origin. Consequently, hundreds of thousands of new migrants arriving into Britain have never even tried to adapt to our way of life. Again, Theresa May has a very poor record on this. She backed wearing the niqab and the burqa, unequivocal symbols of female oppression. She hailed the benefits of Sharia courts. When she was Home Secretary, there wasn't a single prosecution for female genital mutilation, and never has been. The child rapes by grooming gangs in Rotherham, Rochdale and elsewhere were not identified as the racially and ethnically motivated hate crimes they were. Hardline Islamists preach hatred on our streets. They demonstrate against cartoons, women, gay people, Jews, and our country without impunity. When UKIP launched our integration policies last month, they were met with hysteria from left-wing virtue signallers and cowardly politicians who refuse to admit there's a problem with radical Islam in this country. But we stand by those policies, and they're repeated in our manifesto. UKIP will ban the wearing of the niqab and the burqa in public places. We will not accept these dehumanising symbols of segregation and oppression. And let me say, there is no human right to conceal your identity. We will seek to protect girls at risk of FGM by carrying out annual checks. We will not tolerate the Islamisation of our schools, and we will do our utmost to disband Sharia councils which discriminate against women. We must stop appeasing those who would overturn the liberties, equalities, and way of life that so many have fought so hard for. And this is as much to protect law-abiding Muslims as it is anybody else. UKIP will also double down on law enforcement, another issue on which the Tories have gone soft. Their new definition of the purpose of prison doesn't even mention the word punishment. And, as with tackling extremism, their policies show more concern about being labelled racist than preventing crime. In 2014, Theresa May weakened Stop and Search, saying it undermined relations with ethnic minority communities. UKIP warned this would lead to an increase in knife crime, and sadly, we have been proved right. 14 deaths in London alone in just the last 3 weeks. UKIP will reinstate stop and search powers to the police and reduce the burden of paperwork they have to complete each time they exercise this function. And because we believe the primary job of police officers is to prevent crime, keep people safe and catch criminals, we'll provide them with the manpower and resources they need to succeed. UKIP will recruit, train and deploy 20,000 more policemen and women in a direct reversal of the Tory party's cuts. Prisons. We need to keep dangerous offenders off our streets. So we'll also continue the government's prison building programme, but reverse cuts to the prison budget, replacing the 7,000 officers lost since 2010. Only UKIP, it seems, is prepared to put its faith in a strong police force, deterrence and imprisonment as the bedrock of our criminal justice system. And we're the only party to consistently make national defence a priority too. Years of Tory cuts have shrunk the army to its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars. They've made the Royal Navy a shadow of its former self and left the Royal Air Force with fewer than 20 fighter planes for the first time since World War I. In an increasingly unstable world, Britain must have a well-resourced, fit-for-purpose armed force. So we will add an additional £1 billion to the annual defence budget, and by the end of the next Parliament have 20,000 more armed forces personnel protecting our nation. This is UKIP's costed plan to make our country safer. We will reverse the cuts that have put our national security and safety at risk. 20,000 more armed forces, 20,000 more police, 4,000 more border guards and 7,000 more prison officers. And we will refuse to allow culture to be an excuse for crime. We will stand firm against the barbaric ideologies and practices that have been imported to Britain and protect those at risk. Islamism will not be tolerated in our schools or our prisons, nor anywhere in our society, and we will only allow to Britain migrants who abide by our rules. Our entire way of life is under threat, make no mistake. And if that protecting it means making tough choices, then UKIP will make those tough choices. Keeping us safe is the first duty of government. But of course, it's not the only duty. So what else is in our manifesto? Well, times have certainly changed since we launched the last one in 2015. Back then, leaving the European Union was UKIP's dream, and we outlined a vision of how strong and democratic Britain could be if we had the courage to leave. A year later, the people found the courage and voted for that dream. And now Article 50 has been triggered, and we dare to believe it will become a reality. However, UKIP will keep pushing until we are actually out, and properly out. In this manifesto, we set out 6 Brexit tests which need to be passed before we can say we're finally free of the EU. These include the right of Parliament to make our laws, and for our Supreme Court to actually be supreme. We must have full control of immigration and asylum and border control, and not be bound by any free movement of people obligation. We must leave the single market and the customs union and take back our seat at the World Trade Organization. There must be no divorce payment, and this should all be done and dusted by the end of 2019. There's one more critical test, the maritime test. Under international law, British fishermen should have the right to fish up to 200 miles off the coast or to the halfway point between the UK and neighbouring countries. But there are signs that our fishing communities may be sold out. Our fishing communities should know they have a true friend in UKIP. If the Tories seek to barter their rights away, we will fight them every inch of the way. We'll also introduce a programme to encourage economic growth in the coastal communities that have suffered most from our European Union membership, offering significant reductions in business rates and giving local authorities additional powers to revive and rejuvenate our seaside towns. UKIP will not treat our coastal communities as being at the end of the line. As in 2015, all our policies in this manifesto are fully costed. We have stuck to the same financial principles and modelling that we utilised in 2015. We're the one party prepared to spell out big reductions in unnecessary and wasteful spending programmes in order to fund our priorities. By making significant cuts to the foreign aid budget, scrapping HS2 vanity projects such as HS2, amending the Barnett formula and ceasing to pay contributions to the EU, we will be saving £35 billion a year by the end of the Parliament. That means for the second general election in a row, UKIP spending proposals do not involve raising any taxes. Yes, UKIP goes into this election as the only party promising not to raise taxes. Our fiscal approach is responsible, and our priorities are those of the British people. And, of course, one of the top priorities of the British people right now is the NHS and care for the elderly. UKIP believes it's wrong for the country to be spending nearly £14 billion every year on foreign aid when the Red Cross is describing the situation in our own hospitals as a humanitarian crisis. UKIP will reduce the aid budget to 0.2% of GNI, which enables us to make our biggest spending pledge of this manifesto. We'll use the £11 billion a year we'll be saving by the last year of the next Parliament in its entirety to fund a significant increase in money for the NHS and social care. This is significantly more than any of the other parties can offer, and we can show exactly where the money is coming from. UKIP will stop sending so much money abroad and make our NHS and adult social care services the envy of the world. The £11 billion a year will more than close the NHS funding gap. It will enable us to lift the cap on medical school places and fund the cost of training, abolishing tuition fees for medical students, provided they work in the NHS for at least 10 out of the 15 years after they qualify. It means we can increase the number of nurse training places, reinstate bursaries, and remove the 1% pay cap for NHS staff earning less than £35,000 a year. By 2022, we'll see 24,000 more nurses and 3,500 more midwives working in the NHS, and we'll be well on the way to seeing 10,000 more GPs too. We're also going to put significant sums into improving mental health provision, especially for our children and young people who are very poorly served at the moment. Our plans include developing a national school-based counselling strategy for England on a par with those already operating in Wales and Northern Ireland. We'll triple the amount we ring-fenced for dementia programmes in 2015, upping our funding pot to £400 million every year and rolling out a national dementia plan to identify priorities, coordinate expertise and deliver a bold new programme of research, treatment and care. UKIP values the hard work and experience older people bring to our communities and the voluntary sector, probably collapse without them. The Tory attacks on the elderly are shocking. UKIP is proud to say we will maintain the winter fuel allowance, free bus passes, prescriptions and eye tests for all over 60s, and we will keep the triple lock on state pensions. UKIP will, of course, ensure that the National Health Service is a national health service, not an international health service. And we will roll out the toughest ever crackdown on health tourism. However, I'd also like to make it crystal clear, unlike Theresa May, that UKIP will guarantee the right of the 167,000 EU nationals who work in the NHS and our social care sector the right to stay in the UK after Brexit. If you're concerned about cuts to our foreign aid budget, please don't be. A 2015 World Economic Forum study concluded that in the developing world there was no effect of aid on growth. Trade is proven to be a far better way to lift developing nations out of poverty. We'll embrace the opportunity Brexit Britain has to sign mutually beneficial free trade deals with developing nations so they can develop economically rather than rely on handouts, which so often never even reach those actually in need. We'll still be spending the same percentage of GNI on aid as the USA, and more in cash terms than Spain and Italy combined. And we'll continue to fund aid projects that make a real difference, such as clean water programmes, childhood inoculations, medical assistance, and emergency and disaster relief. And UKIP will launch a dedicated 500-bed hospital ship to improve the contribution Britain can make in times of global crisis. She'll deliver large-scale relief to our armed forces on active operational duties, to civilians and refugees in war zones, and undertake humanitarian missions in peacetime. She'll also potentially provide useful reinforcement in case of emergencies here at home. We will not shirk our international responsibilities. So what else is only UKIP offering? A workable plan to create the homes our country is so desperately short of. Other parties promise to build hundreds of thousands of new homes, but it's pie in the sky because the builders aren't there. UKIP, however, has a real answer to the housing crisis. We'll roll up to 100,000 high-quality, low-cost, factory-built modular homes every year, homes that will cost less than £100,000 to buy, so they're affordable on the national average wage of £26,000 a year. Not only that, we'll create jobs as we go. When we leave the EU, some of the £1 billion in funds we'll get back from the regional development budget will be used to boost capacity in UK-based modular homes manufacturing. Homes will be manufactured where jobs are needed and built where homes are needed. Mostly on brownfield sites that are we'll prioritise brownfield sites so they'll be close to existing infrastructure. And these homes will only be for owner occupation, not rental, and they can't be sold on the open market, only back into the scheme at a guaranteed price of cost plus inflation. To further help young people, we'll restore maintenance grants for the poorest students immediately, and we stand by our 2015 pledge to abolish tuition fees for science, technology, engineering and mathematics students, as well as medical students. To cut the cost of living for ordinary families, we'll reduce energy bills by removing VAT and the green levies and taxes we're currently forced to pay to help the energy companies invest in renewable energy. UKIP thinks their profits are high enough already. If they want to invest in renewable energy, they should pay for it themselves. UKIP will also remove VAT from takeaway food, from women's sanitary products, and will scrap the TV licence. These policies will save households an average of £400 a year by 2022. Finally, when Paul Nuttall stood for the leadership of our party, he pledged to create an English Parliament. So that is now in our manifesto. UKIP will put England on the same footing as Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The new English Parliament will sit in the chamber currently occupied by the House of Lords, which UKIP will abolish. I'm surprised that's the most popular policy. There you go. We will also cut the number of MPs in the House of Commons and ensure they are all elected on a proportional voting system, meaning every vote will count. All in all, our plans will reduce the number of politicians in Parliament from 1,475 down to just 700, making government smaller, more manageable, and saving the taxpayer a great deal of money. So there you have it. I'd like to thank my policy team, consisting of Mark Quinlan, who is simply the best policy analyst and researcher around, our finance guru, although he wishes to remain anonymous. I'd also like to thank Kathleen Garner for her help with proofing, and designer Lisa Bland, who has made the manifesto look amazing. And also thank you to Patrick O'Flynn for your invaluable contributions throughout this process. UKIP is the only party that's serious about tackling the threat of radical Islam in Britain. We're the only party that will reverse Tory cuts to the defence and security of our nation. We are the only party that is 100% committed to cutting immigration and introducing a compatibility test for migrants. UKIP is the only party to have a serious, costed plan to get the NHS back on its feet and to build more homes. And we're the only party going into this election promising not to put up taxes. Our country needs a radical, social, economic and democratic change. The blueprint is here. All you have to do now is vote for it. Thank you very much.
We've got quotes in. Well done, that was well done. Okay, Q&A. Let's start. Well, we'll start with Michael.
Mr. Nuttall, your opening speech, wasn't that blatantly exploiting Manchester for election and party?
No, Michael, it certainly wasn't exploiting Manchester. What I wanted to do was to ensure that the democratic process continued, because the one thing that they hate most about us is our democracy, and they want to see it destroyed. And the best way of telling them that they won't win is by getting out campaigning and debating these issues. So no, it wasn't trying to jump on the back of Manchester or anything like that. It was basically telling these people they will not beat us. Okay? I'll do the broadcast now.
Thank you. Andy Bell 5 News. Well, following on from that, can you confirm that you haven't added anything in to your manifesto since what happened on Monday night, that everything you presented here was already there before the attack in Manchester?
No, it went to print on Saturday night. Okay? Nothing has been added. We'll do broadcast first.
Libby Vina, ITV News. You say you're not exploiting Manchester, but you say also that lighting candles is not enough. Isn't that an insult to all the people who come out and show their respect?
Do you want to answer this one?
Ask a sensible question.
Okay, it's okay.
We need justice.
Okay. No, it's not insulting people. You know, people have a right to go out and light candles, and of course show their grief on Twitter. But for the politicians, it isn't enough. And the problem that we've got at the moment in this country is the politicians are too cowardly to basically say what the real issue is. They like to dodge the question. And we are the only party who's put forward in our manifesto a series of policies which we think will help solve the problem. It's going to be a long process. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of things that will need to be actioned. But at least we're the only party that is willing to face up and say what the real problem is. So we're not exploiting anything, actually. What we're doing is telling these evil, warped, cruel terrorists who hate our way of life, you will not win.
Thank you, BBC News. Mr. Nuttall, Emma Evans, you had very strong words for Theresa May to record as Home Secretary. You've accused her of allowing jihadis in. It sounds like you're near as damn it blaming the Prime Minister for this attack and the circumstances that led to it.
No.
Is that the BBC? Stupid
Sorry. Please. Let's be respectful. No, I'm not accusing the Prime Minister. I'm saying that politicians in this country have been weak on this issue for many years. In terms of her record as Home Secretary, I think it's appalling. This is a Home Secretary who cut the numbers of police officers, cut the number of border guards, cut the number of prison officers. I'm sorry, it isn't a good record at all. But as for blaming her personally for the attack, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. What I am saying is that the politicians in this country are too cowardly at the moment to actually face up to what the real issue is. Hang on. Yes, and I'll continue.
Peter Walker from the Guardian newspaper. You said you were a great place to point out at the start of your speech that you do not believe the great majority of Muslim people in Britain are a problem. And yet your manifesto has a very big picture of Gerard Batten in it, who's still your Brexit spokesperson. And immediately after the Manchester attack, he published a blog saying Islam is, and he's not talking about Islamism, he's talking about Islam. He's very plain about this. It's a barbaric, progressive ideology that's primitive and backwards. Do you plan to get rid of him as your Brexit spokesman, or is he too powerful and advanced to do that?
Gerard is sitting behind you, so you can speak to him at the end and he'll answer all those questions. Theo! Right.
Well, you had a choice yesterday afternoon when that minute's silence was announced. You could have put back this manifesto
I couldn't.
at 12 o'clock when
No.
campaign was being due. Instead, in 10 minutes' time, the nation is going to stop to remember victims. Surely you're exploiting.
No, Theo, we will, of course, we too will take part in that minute silence. Absolutely. We tried to push this back, but the broadcasters told us we couldn't. Okay? That's the bottom line. You know, we wanted to push this back, but we were told we weren't allowed to. Okay? So no, it's got nothing to do with making the lunchtime news at all.
Focusing on the wrong problem. Focusing on the wrong problem here.
Tom Rayner from Sky News. Last night, your energy spokesman said that it was time to consider the unthinkable with regards to internal policies for people who may be on the radar of intelligence services. Do you agree with him?
I haven't seen what he said. I don't know where he's actually said that. What I will say is that we need to get real about the problems that we face in this country. And what I do fear, I mean, there's been an attack in March, there's now been one this month. I just fear that this is the future that we've got to get used to, because we're not the politicians are not prepared to tackle this situation head on. Well, I'm not prepared to answer that question because I haven't seen exactly what he has written or said or anything like that. What I will say is that we've got to get real and stand up and be counted and at least have the bottle to say where the real problem lies.
After the Westminster attack, you were saying that you wanted to see changes to the way mosque funding was recorded. Why didn't you have the bottle to put that in your manifesto?
Well, do you know, I'll stand here right now and say, you know, I don't believe that there should be Saudi funding of mosques. I think they spread. Hang on. I think.
Manchester has changed things.
Perhaps I can comment on that. I don't think it is fair to single out one country in a manifesto. The nature of this election meant it was a snapshot election. I would have loved to have been able to spend a lot of time researching funding of mosques, so it could have gone in here. But we simply didn't have the time. And I don't think, given that we don't have, or I certainly didn't have all the evidence to hand, it's not fair to single out one country. Because I suspect Saudi Arabia is not the only culprit.
Okay. Hold on. Adam.
Yes, I wonder if I can ask you about particularly perhaps Suzanne, because she's working with this. What is the point of, in this context, listing Theresa May's failures as Home Secretary on policing, prison numbers, funding the military, controlling borders, if you are not suggesting that she must bear some responsibility for the security failures which led to what happened in Manchester?
I think she must bear some responsibility. All politicians who voted against measures or voted for measures to make cuts bear some responsibility. As I said, Adam, you know, I think when 9/11 happened, we should have had a serious rethink about immigration. It didn't happen. Of course, the European Union is equally culpable as well. And I also lay a lot of blame at the feet of the commissioners as well, who, as Paul said, were far too cowardly to face up to the real issues in our country and what needs to be done to keep people safe. That has got to be the primary focus of any government, any politician. And frankly, if they're not prepared to stand up and do what needs to be done to keep people safe, then they're simply not fit to govern. I stand by what I said.
I'll take one more question because I don't want to push forward towards 11 o'clock. I'll take 2. Right, Harry, go on, and then we'll have to...
Suzanne isn't quite extraordinary there, which is that Theresa May must bear some responsibility for what happened 3 days ago in Manchester. Do you agree with that?
I didn't say she must bear... No, I didn't say what she must bear responsibility for. The only person who is responsible for, or people who is responsible for what happened in Manchester are the terrorists. Let me make that absolutely clear. And I think sometimes we are perhaps a little bit too quick to blame other people but the terrorists in these situations. But the circumstances that allowed their ideology to breed, that allowed their hatred to spread, politicians should have taken action on that long ago. And once again, my worry is that we have this horrific atrocity. And yet in a couple of weeks' time, it will all be forgotten about. And, you know, those families won't forget. Those families will still be grieving. But my worry is that the politicians will move on and nothing will change. And I think Paul and I both stand here today to say that must not happen.
Last question, and then we've got to wrap up.
The government won't tell us which part of the economy you would prioritise and try to reduce immigration. You want to reduce immigration by much more. So which part of the economy would you be prioritising? Which foreign workers would you be looking at?
Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're looking ultimately at foreign workers who have a job to come to. A job where they can sustain themselves and their family, workers who will actually, you know, be able to contribute economically to this country. But also in our manifesto, we talk about agricultural workers as well. We're conscious that the farming community, for instance, is very aware that it needs to have a period of short migration to be able to get crops in and so on and so forth. So we make accommodation for that in our manifesto too. I beg your pardon?
Which foreign workers are most unskilled?
I think unskilled. And we've also said in our manifesto that we will put a moratorium on unskilled workers for 5 years because there are, you know, nearly 1 million young unemployed people in this country. And if there's one thing that makes me sick, it's people who say, oh, they don't want to work, they don't want a job. Well, I'm out on the streets, I talk to them. They do want to work, they do want a job. And there are jobs that they could do very easily with a minimum of training. And these big businesses, I'm afraid, have got to get used to employing British people, training them up, and paying them a decent living wage instead of just importing foreign cheap labour.
And allow me to simply add to that. You know, this morning it's been announced that we've allowed a city the size of Hull to come to our country in the last year net. If we continue on this road, we're going to have a population of 80 million by the middle of this century. It is unsustainable. Something's got to be done, and we're the only party who are honest and realistic about cutting immigration numbers. One, for social cohesion reasons, and two, we think it's bad for working class communities because it depresses wages. Okay, guys, we're going to have to wrap it up there, okay? Thank you very much for coming this morning. The minute silence will take place in 2 minutes time, so thank you very much. Cheers.